later. Just a quick thank you to the DC Data Summit for including us, and also to the innovator sponsors. And I'll go over the agenda quickly for what we'll be doing during our time and your roles as participants. I'll do a brief welcome for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to talk for a bit about a recent report that we published on what we know about outcomes for DC's former high school students. And then I'll turn it over to Barry and Kevin to talk about E.L. Haynes' method for collecting information and the student experience. And then we'll spend some time on an interactive data exercise that Barry will lead, and we'll have a quick closing at the end. For participant roles, please feel free to enter a question using the chat box at any time. We will also have some opportunities to discuss in breakout rooms toward the end, and also as a full group. So be ready. And we will be using a data set later in the session. I have a link here if you'd like to download it now. It's also in the Whova chat, and we will put it in the Zoom chat later when we're getting ready to use it, so that you have access. Okay, so I'll start my part by taking a look at the findings from a recent report that we released at the DC Policy Center on the transition for college or career for the district's high school students. We released this report in June, and what we were looking for is to get a sense of what we know about outcomes for high school students in DC across the whole city. Some LEAs, including E.L. Haynes and many on DCPS and many others, do a great job of tracking students, but we don't have a full picture of what happens for all students across DC. We've been working on this report for a while, but we think that it's especially critical to examine these outcomes now, given the impact of COVID-19, and which has decreased the potential for learning to occur this spring, and also has disrupted post-secondary plans and employment opportunities nationally and in our region. So if you're interested, Tanaz, who's the education analyst at the DC Policy Center, will put links to these reports in the chat if you'd like to take a closer look now or later. And I'll go through some findings, just starting with a look at what we know and don't know about outcomes for high school students in DC. We took a look at what we know for around high school experience, and then post-secondary and workforce outcomes, understanding that students don't necessarily pursue these in a linear path, and sometimes are involved in two or more of them at the same time. But what we do know is that for DC students, we know much more about the high school experience. We know about graduation rates and academic achievement. And then when we looked for post-secondary education, this is not an exhaustive list of everything we'd like to know, but when we thought about what we wanted to know about the post-secondary experience, we do know who enrolls in post-secondary 6 months after graduation as a city, but we don't know things around, for example, the completion rate for all students within 6 years, or what kind of institution students are attending, what kind of degree they are earning, and so on. And we know even less about workforce outcomes, which ultimately is where a lot of a priority for a lot of schools for their students. So I'll walk through the findings from this report. As a broad introduction, we looked at some available data on graduation rates, enrollment in post-secondary, and also a data point from a few years ago on how many students complete post-secondary within 6 years. And just looking at the data, and I think many of you may be aware of this, most of DC's high school students do enter the workforce with a high school diploma or less initially. We estimated that 31 out of every 100 students who are in DC's 9th grade cohort, 31 will not complete high school in 4 years, 30 will complete high school in 4 years, but not enroll immediately in post-secondary. And when we continued on, 25 will enroll in some post-secondary, but won't complete in 6 years. And 14 ninth graders will eventually complete post-secondary, within 6 years. And this is a ballpark number, just using data, but gives you a sense of what we could put together for a citywide view. And I'll move through starting with high school outcomes, the information that we could find for the city, starting with framing around who are DC's high school students, especially for those who may be joining from outside of DC. This chart looks at the 9th grade cohort by race and ethnicity and special population for those who would have graduated in the last school year. The majority of DC's high school students are students of color. 75% of the 9th grade cohort were Black students and 19% were Latino students. This is a little bit different than the pre-K, all students in pre-K through 12. And in addition, 57% are considered to be at risk. And in DC, this is a designation that provides additional funding per student around if students receive public benefits, if they are involved in the foster care system, experience homelessness, or overage in high school. For the high school cohort, more students, or a higher percentage of students, are at risk, at 57% compared to 45% of students overall. This is in part due to the overage in high school category, but also the high school population shifting a little bit, with about 17% of students living in DC attending private school for high school. And then we looked a little bit at graduation rates. DC's overall graduation rate has increased a little bit over time by 3 percentage points from 2014-15 to 2018-19, with a peak in 2016-17. But when we look at results by subgroup in the bar chart, there stark disparities exist between particular student groups. For this year, the graduation rate was 68.2%. When we compare, for example, students who are at risk and students who are not at risk, we see about a 34 percentage point gap between their graduation rates. We also looked at some indicators of preparedness for post-secondary or career. We looked at 3 sources. We looked at the state assessment and the participation and performance on AP and IB tests and the SAT benchmark, just to get a sense of what assessments tell us about preparedness, which is not exhaustive and doesn't think about other competencies that, aside from academic, that you would need to participate fully in the workforce. But from this, we can say that between 18 and 34% of students are ready as defined by these assessments. We also looked at post-secondary, what we know about post-secondary enrollment. This information is from the state report card. A little over half of high school graduates continue to post-secondary within 6 months. White students are the most likely to continue, and then females are the group that's most has the second highest rate of enrollment at 61%. We shifted to data sources. We wanted to get a sense of where DC students attend post-secondary if they choose to go. And we looked at some data for this from the IPEDS database, which is a national database, the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Database, to see where first-time DC students are attending schools. This does include private school students, but it gives us a sense of where the majority of our students are going. DC attracts, out of all states, DC attracts the highest percentage of first-time students at 20% of all students. And about half of DC students, when they enroll for the first time, they attend schools in DC, Maryland, or Virginia. Within DC, University of the District of Columbia and Trinity Washington University are the most popular universities at 304 and 97 students, respectively. And then outside of DC, Delaware State University and Montgomery College are the most popular institutions, enrolling about 60 students each. About 32% attended an HBCU in the year that we looked at, and about half enrolled at public institutions. We also use this national database to get a sense of what DC students might be studying when they go to if they go to post-secondary. We don't know where, what DC students specifically study when they go to post-secondary, but we were able to look at the most popular majors at these institutions where first-time students who are from DC do enroll for 4-year institutions and 2-year institutions. You'll see that business, management, marketing, and related support services appear on both as popular majors at both 4-year institutions and 2-year institutions attended by former DC students. And this just gives you a sense of what the popular programs are for DC students. We were also interested to see what we could tell about workforce outcomes for educational attainment for DC students. There's there is one data point, I think from 2016, that 36% of those who enroll in post-secondary do complete within 6 years. And this kind of gives a sense, this chart gives a sense of what we know about a particular slice of DC's former students from census data. We looked at, it's not perfect, but we looked at the group of of young adults who are living in DC and were also born in DC, making the assumption that they likely attended high school in DC. They could have attended private school, or they could have lived in DC as children and then left and come back. But we just wanted to get a sense of at least this slice, which represents about 23% of all young adults who were born in DC. So when we look at this, we looked at 2 age groups. We looked at the 18 to 24 age group, and then older young adults from 25 to 34. You can see that educational attainment increases slightly as this group gets older, which makes sense. By the time they are 25 to 34, about 52% living in DC and born here have a high school degree as their highest level of education, and about a third have a post-secondary degree. We wanted to get a sense of how this profile compared to the job market in DC, which a lot of us are familiar with, and we looked to Department of Labor data to get a sense of all the jobs available just in DC, understanding that some people commute to these jobs from outside of DC, and of course some people commute from DC to neighboring states, but just to get a sense. And over half of all the jobs in DC, 58% require a post-secondary degree, and just 7% do not require a high school education. So it's a bit of a mismatch with the profile that we were able to look at for young adults born and living in DC as young adults. And then this gives an example from this database for the top 10 most common jobs available to young adults or to anyone in DC for those who completed high school, with the average salaries and the number of jobs. So the most commonly available job in DC for those with a high school diploma is a security guard with an annual income around $40,000. There are some occupations that are with much higher incomes, kind of in the business, around 100,000 in business operations or general operations managers. And then we looked at this, returning to the census data, we looked at what this what happens with the profile of educational attainment and for those born and living in DC as young adults, given the job market, and looked at average income for 25 to 34-year-olds. The overall average income for this group was around $35,000. It's much higher at $56,000 per year for those who have completed post-secondary, and about half of that at $24,000 for those who completed high school without completing post-secondary. We also looked at unemployment for this same group for 25 to 34-year-olds born and living in DC. Overall, for this group, it was around around 17%, and this was before COVID, the impact from COVID. We know that the unemployment rate in DC is at the highest it's been since the early 1980s, and that this is disproportionately affecting younger workers and those with less qualifications. We're seeing fewer job postings. So I think these numbers would look very different now, but we'll give you a sense. So that's all we have for the kind of the findings statewide. I'll pause now. I can answer any questions you have about the data. I would also love to hear if people want to take a minute to reflect on whether these findings surprised you, or if you work for a school, if your school collects data on any of these outcomes. If so, what challenges do you encounter? And to what extent do these outcomes for students mirror the outcomes at your school? And then data that you see that are missing from these findings, other things you'd like to see the city value and gather information on. I'll take a minute to see if anybody has any questions, and I'll stop sharing. Danaz will put the questions in the chat in case that's helpful. So if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I will, oh, go ahead, or just start speaking. We're in a meeting format to make things less formal.
Hi, Chelsea. Can you see me?
Hi. Yes.
So I'm Monique Rivera, and I work at Maya Angelou's Public Charter School in Northeast. I'm the career development manager there. So I started this year, and one of my roles is to collect data on the students who complete their GEDs, because we have a high school, but I work in the youth program that teaches the GED classes. So I'm collecting data on those who became employed and up until a year after they've graduated. And so some of the challenges, and I just started doing this, but some of the challenges so far are kind of keeping track of them after they leave the program. Just like, phone numbers change, or I don't know if they have multiple email addresses or things like that. So it really becomes difficult to follow up with them after they're no longer within our four walls, or now, that we're teaching them. So that's just one of the challenges. So I don't know if anybody has those challenges as well, but I would be looking forward to other ideas people might have about that.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I think it's definitely one of the reasons why we don't collect information on income and other outcomes after graduation. It's not because people don't care or don't want to know, but it's incredibly challenging, and people like you who do look into it, it's a heavy lift, along with keeping everything else going. I know that Barry will talk about what Yale Haynes does a little bit, but yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, hi, I'm coming to you from Chicago, and then also worked at a nonprofit that was in 6 cities across the US, and fully agree, super hard to get the employment data after. So you earlier said that you got some of this data from iPads. Are you getting employment data through that, or where are you getting the ones that you were able to pull? Is it just generally, or are you able to pull like from an identifying factor?
That's a great question. I should have been clearer. So the iPads data we looked at only refers to post-secondary enrollment, and it shows kind of for each institution in the US, the number of first-time students who lived in DC when they applied. So it's not a perfect sense, but you can just get an idea of the distribution of students, at least at that point in time. It doesn't track necessarily students who transfer. It doesn't track students who transfer between institutions or start later and then kind of restart, which is definitely a gap. The employment data we looked at was from the census data for the American Community Survey data through the census, and it's not perfect again, none of this is perfect, but we looked at, for DC, for the census data, you can use the microdata to look at a slice of people who were who are currently living in DC, but were also born here, understanding that this is a biased sample, I think, on both ends. People who were born in DC and leave could do so because they were displaced and no longer able, as as the city gentrified, or it could be people who have very high incomes and or have moved to another city or left to go to post-secondary, never came back. But it does give you a sense of at least one population, and I think a population that DC should really care about to make sure there are opportunities that students are prepared for locally should they want to stay. Great, so I really appreciated those questions from Monique and Rachel. I know this is a kind of a weird format to have a session, but do appreciate that. If no one else has any questions, I'll get ready to introduce Barry, who will talk about what E.L. Haynes Public Charter School does in this area. Barry is the Alumni College Success Counselor at E.L. Haynes, and I'll let her take it from here.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I am going to share my screen, and while doing so, just share a little bit of information about E.L. Haynes' journey with our alumni support program. As we have grown our school and grown this programming, I think have been on a journey to figure out what it means to support our students after they graduate, how to make that support something that's sustainable over time, that has a high impact on student persistence, particularly through college, and also can inform our high school program and support us as we are developing a college-going culture among our current students. Given some real limits that we face around capacity and around resources that we can devote to students who aren't in the building every day with us. Just for a little bit of background about E.L. Haynes, we graduated our first class of seniors in 2015. So we just graduated our 6th class this past June. And in the school year following, our first class of graduates launched an alumni support program with a half-time role. The following year, we doubled the number of grads as we had our 2nd class graduate and added another team member who also had this as a full-time focus. So kind of the equivalent of 1 full-time staff member. But obviously that rate of growth isn't possible to sustain as we continue to graduate more and more students without having, the ability to create as much new staff. And so we have thought a lot about lessons that we can learn that can really help influence our 9th to 12th grade experience to better prepare students for the post-secondary challenges, and how we can connect students with and leverage on-campus resources, knowing that being kind of that go-to point ourselves isn't going to be sustainable or really what students need as they're learning how to advocate for themselves in different settings. So now, about 5 years later, we're back to having about a half-time position as we've shifted some more resources to our college counseling. Again, with that kind of balance of figuring out what we can do before students leave the building to prepare them for post-secondary success. And I would say just knowing, especially this year, we're really entering an unprecedented year with a lot of shifts in both K-12 and higher ed. And so we anticipate things evolving and trying to figure out, particularly this fall, the type of support that our students are going to need to be successful. So For us at E.L. Haynes, our alumni support program includes an alumni counselor, which I just shared some of the history of, mainly supporting students with academic, social, financial, and emotional needs. We have an alumni college support fund to support graduates with small financial emergencies that could get in the way of their progress towards graduation. So our alumni are able to apply for up to $500 in funding over the course of an academic year. And then we have year-round activities to keep our alumni both connected to each other, but also to the broader community, and really wanting them to be able to provide some mentorship and support to students who are in our building now. And we also do targeted workshops and networking opportunities for our alum. So our programming focuses really heavily on the summer after students graduate, wanting to make sure that whatever plan they've created over the course of their senior year, they're able to implement that in the year that follows. Again, we do a lot of programming connecting with our current students, and then trying to think about the skills and resources that we think we're best equipped to share with students, with our graduates at key points. We also collect data from a number of different sources, and some of this we're going to be looking at a little bit later on in the session in the breakout groups. We do a senior exit survey where we gather some information about the plans and goals that our graduates have for the future, and also have them reflect on their own habits, their mindset, their sense of belonging over the course of their time in high school. We get our data about student enrollment and persistence through the National Student Clearinghouse, and then do additional verification on top of that. And Monique, I really appreciate your sharing before and your comment. I think that, you know, when we had a lower student to counselor ratio, we were really making an effort to do that verification ourselves before we got the National Student Clearinghouse data, and definitely felt like sometimes I felt like I was stalking kids of like trying to find them on social media or finding a friend who could call them and say to call me. And so that effort is really hard. And so I hear that and would love for folks who feel like they're doing that better to share that. But as we've grown, are really more reliant on the NSC data for the enrollment verification that we can do. And then look at the types of schools our students are enrolling in, and other pathways, which for vocational and workforce training and military really is based on student self-reporting. We don't have any kind of organized place we can get that information. And then thinking about their progress through college, looking at when we have students enrolling for the first time, transferring and stopping out and returning. Every semester, we do a survey, both for our students who are enrolled in college and those who are not enrolled, and collect transcripts from students with questions about their academic, financial, social, emotional well-being. So a couple of areas where we feel like we've had some great progress over the years have been using this information that we're getting from our students who have gone on to college to inform our senior experience. I sit on the senior team at E.L. Haynes and have been able to share feedback about the challenges and also the areas of preparation that our alumni are reporting, to really think about how we can work with students in their 12th grade year, and then ideally backwards planning from there, so that they feel better prepared. I think in particular, time management is a major issue we've heard students reporting on as a struggle that they face when they get to college. And so we have thought a lot about how to use that information and what our alumni are saying are the biggest challenges they're facing, to be able to kind of map backwards and build more skills and habits while they're in high school with us. Our school uses Power BI to do a ton of stuff with data. And so this year, one thing that was really exciting is we work with Beyond 12 is our alumni data tracker. And we were able to integrate the information from there into Power BI to be able to produce more reports, which we think as a school is going to set us up both to be able to do better tracking and also some more goal setting around you know, where we want to see our graduates going in the future. Couple areas of growth that we're really focused on. One is thinking about how we can align what we know about student enrollment and persistence with high school GPA and college graduation rate data. We know that those are two really big predictors of success in college, and so wanting to be able to look for trends that we can see and make sure that those are aligned, as well as identifying outliers and students who may have had a lot of success in high school and are really struggling in post-secondary, to think about what we can learn from them. We continue to work on how we can disaggregate our data by subgroup. I think that work over time has been really important in illuminating some trends around who is succeeding and who's struggling after they leave us, and wanting to be able to use that information also to better plan for our college advising program with our current students. Another area that as an organization we've worked hard on is improving our data tracking from 9th to 12th grade around involvement with extracurricular activities and pre-college program participation. And so integrating the data that we're getting, and again, thinking about some research about the importance of a sense of belonging for student success and persistence, wanting to be able to link better. And then really getting to a point where we're able to use the 9-12 data and use our alumni data sources to push our high school program and goals to where we want them to be. So we are going to have the chance in a little bit to look more specifically at data, but I'm really excited now that one of our graduates has joined us today. So I'm going to introduce him, Kevin Peralta, who graduated from E.L. Haynes in 2016, just graduated from college a couple of months ago. So as a new college graduate, and hope in the chat you folks can share some love and excitement around that. We're really proud of him to share a little bit more about his experience at E.L. Haynes in terms of feeling prepared or areas where he maybe didn't as he got to college, and then what our alumni support program has meant to him. So after we do this, we'll have a chance for some questions for me and Kevin, and then we'll move into looking at data. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Kevin.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to read from some notes that I have here. First, I'll introduce myself. Like Ms. Mormon said, my name is Kevin. I transferred into E.L. Haynes my 10th grade year from another public charter school. During my time at E.L. Haynes, I was involved in various extracurricular activities. I was on the Latin dance team. I helped found like a program called Boys to Men, which is like a mentorship program for males at our school. I was like president of the Math Honor Society, and I graduated with like a 3.4 GPA, which wasn't as high as some other students or like seen as competitive at other schools, but I think was pretty good for me. I also, during my time at Haynes, I completed like various summer programs. I did a program at GW Medical School and a program at the NIH. So that was pretty helpful. My senior year, I got the Posse Scholarship and I went to Lafayette. At Lafayette, the first year was kind of a difficult transition. I struggled to adjust socially, emotionally, and academically. I ended up falling behind, I believe it was 3 credits. And in order to keep your financial aid to come into the next year, you can only be behind 2. So I ended up having to take a class over the summer, which Ms. Mormon and the college office were pretty helpful with. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. My sophomore year, I started to learn how to use my resources a little bit more. And I started playing more of an active role in creating like the tight-knit community of students like me, students of color that come from a low socioeconomic background at my school. So I started engaging in different cultural organizations. I lived in Portlock which is like the Black Cultural Center on campus, where a lot of students gather to either have social events, have discussions, things like that. I started Brothers of Lafayette, which is kind of like a model of Boys to Men, kind of the same idea, creating a support group for men of color at Lafayette. That helped me be a little more successful than it was my freshman year. Junior year was a little bit rough at the beginning. I think I had to learn how to become more independent because that's the year that every grade starts to matter a little bit more. People kind of isolate and go their own way a little bit more. But I learned how to become more independent my second semester and ended up almost making Dean's List. My senior year, I was dealing with like some personal issues at home. There was also like a lack of income, which created like financial stress among me and my family. I fell behind another credit in the fall, and then I ended up taking winter classes, which again, Miss Morton in the college office were helpful with in terms of getting me to sign up for classes, paying for them and all of that. I think in terms of how my experience at Haynes prepared me for college, I think definitely having experience outside of Haynes with like either personal, like the programs that I did at GW and at NIH, I think they helped me develop my social skills and helped me kind of really learn what it meant to be, like what it is to be in like a professional environment. I think the emphasis on like mastery of course content over like enforcing discipline in the classroom was a big thing for me, because when the school that I came from before E.L. Haynes kind of I felt had an emphasis more on like disciplining their students rather than actually their students learning the coursework. And Haynes had a system designed where they wouldn't let you move on to the next concept or chapter, you can call it, until that you demonstrated full mastery on what you were learning. And that was really helpful for me because it helped me learn at my own pace, which I think gave me kind of made me a little bit more interested in what I was learning. I think another thing that was helpful was giving me the opportunity to challenge myself through honors and AP classes. At my other school, it was something that they had to put you in. At Haynes, they gave us the opportunity to actually apply for these classes and, you know, push ourselves. AP Lit and AP Language were two classes that helped me develop a really strong writing background. And one more thing that I think was important was that the teachers made the coursework, I think, relevant to us, especially in Miss Mormon's class, Miss Mormon's history classes, and our literature classes. I think we're more focused on like Black and Latino history and Black and Latino literature, which I think was helpful because it made school a little bit more interesting for us, because we were learning things that pertain to us. How I think Haynes could have been a little bit better. I think there could have been more diversity in the classes that we were taking. I quickly realized at Lafayette that other students had already taken classes like psychology, economics, statistics, and anthropology. So kind of just diversifying the coursework that we were offered. I think we could have had a little bit higher level of rigor and more independence, especially towards junior and senior year. When I got to college, it felt like the amount of time that I had to put into my classes like had nearly tripled. I think we could have had a little bit more like autonomy in our research projects. I wish I would have developed the ability to like complete projects from scratch to finish like more effectively. Like most of the times, a lot of the work was already done for you. Like teachers would give you sources that we had already explored in class or something like that. And once I got to college, it felt like I was like thrown into the deep end. And I think it's really critical for students to develop their research skills because it's something that's useful not only in college, but in like real life and in the workforce. One more thing that I think we could have had a little bit more of was more opportunities to integrate with students from different socioeconomic backgrounds. One of my favorite things that we did outside of Haynes was something called the STEM conference with Georgetown Day School. And I can actually, if you guys give me a second here, I can put a link, I'm putting a link in the chat to an article talking about the STEM conference that we did, just showing that students should have more opportunities to engage with conversations with students from other schools. And I think that should happen not only in STEM, but also in social sciences and in the humanities. I think it's important for students to be able to have discussions about issues from various different viewpoints. I think that was something when I got to college was kind of, I wouldn't say hard to adjust. It was more like just, it definitely took an adjustment because I felt like I wasn't prepared enough to handle kind of different viewpoints. And I think that's something that should happen definitely at an early age. In terms of, and this is my last point, or my last set of points, in terms of how Haynes supported me through college, I think the constant check-ins definitely helped. Miss Mormon in the college office, we checked in like before, throughout, and after every semester. I think the financial support was huge. Like Miss Mormon stated, they do have an emergency scholarship, and I believe I use the emergency fund like every year to either get books or to help pay for some of the summer classes. And I think that was definitely helpful. One of the things that was a determining factor in me graduating on time. The surveys helped a lot because it helped me check in at the end of every semester, no matter how good or bad I did. And the alumni events, I think, were another thing that were really helpful because they helped me stay connected to other alumni and other teachers and mentors in the Haynes community.
Great. Thanks you so much, Kevin. It's always really great to hear your reflections, but I really appreciate you sharing those today. What we're going to do now is take a little bit of time. We're going to open it up to some Q&A for Kevin and me before we move into our activity. And also, just as kind of a preview, we are going to be splitting into breakout groups and be asking that you're talking, if you're comfortable being on camera and interacting a little bit. And so this could be like a good warm up for that. If you feel like you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or just if you are not in a place right now where you are feeling quite ready for the breakout groups, to kind of make that transition as we get ready for that. But wanted to see if there were any questions for Kevin or for me before we move into the activity.
Kevin, I'll just jump in and just echo what Barry said. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. I think especially as somebody who spends a lot of time with data, hearing the stories of what it actually means to take this journey is really impactful. I just have one question. It sounds like you were so connected to E.L. Haynes and also took advantage and made opportunities for yourself at E.L. Haynes and at Lafayette. Do you have a sense of how other E.L. Haynes alumni participated in the survey or stayed connected, or what kind of how representative you feel like you are with the people, your friends that you graduated with?
Yeah, I think and Miss Mormon could attest to this. I definitely had like several different groups of friends. When I was at Yale Haynes, I think the ones that stayed and interacted the most were the ones that were in school, because they found that the college office was very successful in like keeping up with us and checking in, making sure that we were ready for every semester, things like that. I know like the Haynes College office does offer, I'm pretty sure there's like support for students who graduate and don't go on to college. But I think that was mostly the main determining factor of if you were going to stay connected to the school or not.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And I would just add to that, and I think this gets a little bit to what Monique was talking about before, but I do think that one of our ongoing areas of growth is to figure out how to keep connected with students when their plans change or when big challenges come up. And I think, I've had a lot of conversations with students over the years who say, after something has happened and then they re-engage, I say like, why didn't you reach out when that thing was actually playing out? And a lot of feelings of like embarrassment or shame or feeling like they're not kind of living into a version of themselves that is how we saw them. And that has been really challenging. Because I think, as we try to think about what support can we offer and what's sustainable for us, like really wanting to be able to intervene in things before they may derail a student's plans completely, but figuring out how to like maintain that communication, knowing that it's a really big transition and there's a lot that comes up for students in terms of the expectations they're feeling, and how that might impact how they feel like they can communicate or reach out has definitely been ongoing work that we're doing.